A millionaire is on the verge of bankruptcy, with a crucial negotiation about to take place. Without a translator, he meets a young girl, the cleaning lady's daughter, who speaks 8 languages fluently. She helps during the meeting, translating accurately and surprising everyone with her skills. If this beautiful story of resilience and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing. Rain fell hard over Fifth Avenue that Thursday night, turning the streets of New York City into mirrors reflecting the lights of the skyscrapers. On the 32nd floor of one of the most imposing buildings in the district, Robert Caldwell paced back and forth in his office, his Italian shoes sinking into the grey carpet while his hands trembled, clutching a folder full of documents. At 43, he had built an empire, in the technology and investment sector, that was the envy of many. But in that moment, all he could feel was the crushing weight of imminent failure. The clock on the wall marked 10 Sal p.m. In less than 12 hours, Robert would have to face the most important meeting of his life. International investors from China, Germany, France, and the United Arab Emirates were arriving in the United States to decide the future of his company, Caldwell Tech Solutions. The situation was delicate. Over the last 6 months, a series of misguided decisions and the global recession had eroded shareholder confidence. Now he was on the verge of losing controlling interest in his own company, the one he had founded 15 years ago, with nothing but an old computer and an ambitious dream. Robert stopped before the window, observing the city that never sleeps. The lights twinkled like terrestrial stars, each representing dreams, ambitions, and silent battles happening throughout the metropolis. He thought of his father, Anthony Caldwell, an immigrant who had arrived in America with nothing but hope and a willingness to work. His father never had the chance to study, but he had taught his son that education and honesty were the only true riches. Robert had honored that legacy, graduating in engineering and then getting his MBA. But now, with everything about to crumble, he wondered if it had all been in vain. His cell phone vibrated in his suit pocket. It was a message from Laura, his wife of 10 years. She was at home in the suburbs with their twins, Matthew and Gabriella, 8 years old. The message was short, but loaded with concern. "Robert, please come home. The kids miss you and so do I. You need to rest." He sighed deeply. Laura didn't completely understand the gravity of the situation, or perhaps she understood too well, and that's why she insisted he come home to remember what really mattered. But how could he rest when everything he had fought for was at stake? The company wasn't just his livelihood, it was his legacy, his identity, the proof that an immigrant's son could conquer the impossible. Robert returned to the dark mahogany desk and opened the folder again. Inside were charts, financial projections, restructuring proposals. Everything was there, meticulously prepared by his team. The problem wasn't the quality of the proposal. He knew that. The problem was communication. The investors came from different cultures, spoke different languages, had different expectations, and the professional translator he had hired, a renowned expert in international negotiations, had cancelled at the last minute due to a family emergency. Robert had tried to find a replacement all day, but the available professionals either lacked the necessary experience for such a delicate negotiation or were already committed to other clients. He closed his eyes, feeling a throbbing headache in his temples. He needed a miracle. It was then that he heard it, a distant soft sound, almost like a whisper, carried by the wind, a female voice singing. The melody was a classic American tune, something from the 60s, but there was something in the intonation, the perfect pitch, that caught his attention. Robert frowned, confused. Who would be singing in the building at that hour of the night? He stood up and opened the office door, stepping out into the hallway illuminated by fluorescent lights. The sound was coming from the end of the hall, near the service area. Robert walked in that direction, his curiosity momentarily overriding the anxiety consuming him. As he got closer, the voice became clearer. Whoever was singing had a melodious and tuned voice. Turning the corner, Robert saw a scene that took him by surprise. Sitting on the floor of the hallway, with a bucket and a cleaning cloth beside her, was a young woman of at most 18 or 19 years old. She wore a simple blue cleaning uniform and had her brown hair tied back in a ponytail. Her skin glowed under the artificial light, and her brown eyes were closed as she sang, completely absorbed in the music. Beside her lay an open book, and Robert could see that it was written in French. For a moment he just watched, fascinated by the incongruity of the scene. Here was a cleaner, likely without formal education, singing with impeccable technique and reading a book in French in the middle of the night in an empty corporate building. The young woman opened her eyes and jumped in fright upon seeing Robert standing there, watching her. She immediately stood up, dropping the book on the floor, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell," she said quickly, lowering her head. "I didn't know you were still here. I shouldn't be singing while working. It was unprofessional of me." Robert raised his hand, gesturing for her to calm down. No, it's fine. I was just curious. You sing very well. And were you reading in French?" The young woman picked up the book from the floor, holding it against her chest as if it were a precious treasure. "Yes, sir. I like to practice different languages. It helps pass the time while I work." Robert tilted his head, intrigued. "How many languages do you speak?" The young woman hesitated as if afraid her answer would seem arrogant. "Well, I speak English, obviously, and Portuguese, French, Spanish, German, Italian, Mandarin, and Arabic. I'm trying to learn Russian too, but I'm not fluent yet." Robert stood paralyzed. For a moment he thought he had misheard. "You speak 8 languages?" "7 fluently," she corrected with a shy smile. 8 if you count Russian, but like I said, I'm still learning." "And how?" he asked, his voice loaded with disbelief. "Did you learn all that?" The young woman shrugged, a humble gesture that contrasted with the magnitude of her skills. "I've always liked languages. When I was a kid, my mom worked here in the building, and I would come with her sometimes after school. While she cleaned, I would stay in the library on the 10th floor, reading books and watching videos online on the computers. I learned Spanish first, then the others came naturally. It's like my brain is a sponge for languages." Robert felt something moving inside him, a strange sensation he couldn't immediately identify. Was it hope, or just the madness of desperation? "What is your name?" he asked. "Marina, sir. Marina Sanders. My mother is Helen. She's worked here for 20 years as a cleaner." Robert knew Helen, a friendly and dedicated woman, always with a smile on her face despite life's difficulties. He had never imagined she had such an extraordinary daughter. "Marina," he said slowly, forming the words carefully, as if assembling a delicate puzzle. "I have an unusual proposal for you. Tomorrow morning I have the most important meeting of my life. Investors from various countries will be here, and I need someone who can translate perfectly. My translator cancelled at the last minute, and I am desperate. Would you be willing to help me?" Marina's eyes widened. "Sir, she stammered. "I've never done professional translation before. I have no experience with business or important meetings. What if I ruin everything?" Robert took a step forward, his voice becoming firmer. "Marina, I know it's a lot to ask, but I heard how you sing. I saw the French book you were reading. Someone who learns 7 languages on their own just for the love of knowledge has something special. I need someone special tomorrow, not just someone who translates words, but someone who understands nuances, feelings, cultures. You can be that person." Marina bit her lower lip, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and excitement. This would be the opportunity of her life, she knew. A chance to prove she was more than just the cleaner's daughter, more than what people saw when they looked at her simple blue uniform. "I will do my best, Mr. Caldwell," she said finally, her voice loaded with determination. "I promise I won't let you down." Robert felt an immense relief flooding his chest. "Great. The meeting is at 10 in the morning. Can you arrive at 9 so I can explain the situation calmly?" Marina nodded vigorously. "I'll be here, sir. You can count on me." As Robert returned to his office, he felt something he hadn't felt in months, a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could work out. He didn't know that by trusting this unknown young woman, he was about to trigger a series of events that would change not only the future of his company, but also the course of his life. The next morning, the sky over New York was clear, the previous night's rain having washed away the pollution and left the air surprisingly fresh. Marina arrived at the building at 8:30 in the morning, an hour and a half before the agreed time. She had spent the entire night awake, mentally reviewing business vocabulary in every language she knew, preparing for the challenge that awaited her. She wore the only formal outfit she owned, black trousers and a white blouse that her mother had bought at a thrift store for a job interview Marina had gone to a few months ago, which hadn't worked out. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, and she had taken extra care with her appearance, wanting to make a good impression. When she entered Robert's office, he was already there, sitting, behind the desk with deep circles under his eyes, indicating he hadn't slept much either. Upon seeing her, his eyes lit up with relief. "Marina, you came," he said, as if part of him had doubted she would show up. "I promised Mr. Caldwell," she replied with a nervous smile. Robert gestured for her to sit in the chair across from the desk. "Let me explain the situation. My company is in a financial crisis, not due to bad management or lack of innovation, but because some investments we made in external projects didn't yield the expected return. The shareholders are nervous, and some want to sell their shares. If that happens, I could lose control of the company I built." Marina listened attentively, her eyes fixed on Robert, absorbing every word. "Today," he continued, "investors are coming who can save everything. They have capital to inject into the company and confidence in our long-term vision. But they are people from very different cultures. Mr. Zhang is Chinese and speaks Mandarin. Mrs. Mueller is German. Mr. Dubois is French. And Mr. Al-Rashid is from the United Arab Emirates and speaks Arabic. They all speak English too, but in negotiation situations, especially when it comes to values and contractual terms, they prefer to listen and speak in their native languages. They feel safer, more comfortable." Marina nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I understand, sir. And what exactly is the goal of the meeting?" Robert opened the folder on the desk, showing charts and documents to Marina. "I need to convince them to invest $50 million in the company in exchange for a minority stake of 15%. With this investment, I can consolidate the other shareholders and maintain control. But more than that, I need to convey confidence, vision, passion. I need them to see that Caldwell Tech Solutions is not just a struggling company, but a company with exponential growth potential." "And you want me to translate all of this?" Marina said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Yes. But more than translating words, I need you to capture the essence, the feeling. When I speak of passion, you need to convey passion. When I speak of numbers, you need to be precise. When I speak of the future, you need to make them see that future." Marina took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She was just a 19-year-old girl from Queens, the daughter of a cleaner, with no formal education beyond high school. But she had something few had, a natural gift for languages and an ability to understand not just words, but people. "I will do it, Mr. Caldwell," she said with conviction. "I will make them understand your vision." The next 2 hours were intense. Robert reviewed every point of the presentation with Marina, explaining technical terms, cultural contexts, nuances she would need to understand. He was impressed by the speed with which she absorbed information, asking intelligent questions and demonstrating a surprising understanding of complex business concepts. At 9:50, the receptionist called to say the investors had arrived. Robert adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and looked at Marina. "Are you ready?" he asked. Marina nodded, though her heart was racing. "I'm ready, sir." They walked together to the conference room, a wide and elegant space with a long glass table, black leather chairs, and a panoramic view of the city. The investors were already there, talking amongst themselves in their languages. Mr. Zhang was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a serious expression. Mrs. Mueller was a blonde woman of rigid appearance, wearing an impeccable grey suit. Mr. Dubois was an older gentleman with a white beard and glasses, exuding an aura of wisdom. And Mr. Al-Rashid was young, perhaps in his 30s, with piercing black eyes and an imposing presence. When Robert and Marina entered, all eyes turned to them. There was a moment of visible surprise when they saw Marina, a young woman so young and seemingly inexperienced. Robert made the introductions in English, explaining that Marina would be the translator for the meeting. Some of the investors exchanged skeptical glances, but no one said anything. They sat down and the meeting began. Robert started his presentation in English, speaking about the company's history, its achievements, its values. Marina translated his words into each language as necessary, switching from one to another with impressive fluidity. Her pronunciation was perfect, her intonation appropriate, and she captured not just the words, but the emotion behind them. Gradually, the investors' expressions began to change. The initial distrust gave way to attention and then to interest. Marina didn't just translate, she interpreted, subtly adjusting phrases so they made more cultural sense to each listener. When Robert spoke about innovation, she used terms that resonated with the business mentality of each culture. When he spoke about commitment, she chose words that carried the appropriate emotional weight. At one point, Mr. Zhang asked a complex question in Mandarin about financial projections and risks associated with emerging technology investments. Marina translated the question for Robert into English, and then translated Robert's detailed answer back into Mandarin, maintaining all the technical clarity and confidence in the words. Mrs. Mueller, speaking in German, questioned the company's governance structure and how new investors would be protected against unilateral decisions. Again, Marina mediated the conversation with precision and diplomacy. Mr. Dubois, in French, asked about Robert's long-term vision and how he intended to position the company in the global market over the next 10 years. Marina translated not just the words, but the passion and conviction with which Robert responded, causing the French investor to nod with approval, and Mr. Al-Rashid, in Arabic, raised questions about ethical values and corporate social responsibility, important themes in his culture. Marina demonstrated a deep understanding of these nuances, translating in a way that showed respect and alignment with those values. As the meeting progressed, Robert felt increasingly confident. Marina wasn't just a translator, she was a bridge between worlds, a facilitator of mutual understanding, and the investors clearly recognized this. They began to ask deeper questions, to engage more intensely in the conversation, signs that they were genuinely interested. After 3 intense hours, Robert presented the final terms of the proposal: $50 million in exchange for 15% of the company, with guarantees that controlling interest would remain with him and protections for the new investors. Marina translated every detail meticulously, ensuring there was no room for misunderstanding. The investors asked for a few minutes to discuss among themselves. Robert and Marina left the room waiting in the hallway. Robert was visibly nervous, his hands shaking slightly. "You were amazing," he said to Marina, his voice full of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." Marina smiled, but she was also nervous. "Let's wait to see the results, sir. I just did my best." After 15 minutes that seemed like an eternity, the conference room door opened. Mr. Al-Rashid came out first, followed by the others. His expression was neutral, impossible to read. "Mr. Caldwell," he said in English, "we have discussed your proposal." And then he smiled. "We accept the terms. We will invest in Caldwell Tech Solutions." Robert felt his legs go weak. He extended his hand, shaking the hand of each investor, thanking them profusely. Marina translated his words of gratitude into each language, her own heart racing with joy and relief. But Mr. Zhang added something else, speaking in Mandarin. Marina translated, "We want to make it clear, Mr. Caldwell, that part of our decision was based on the exceptional quality of your team. This young woman," he nodded to Marina, "demonstrated not only linguistic skill but rare emotional intelligence and cultural understanding. That tells us a lot about your company's values." Robert looked at Marina, seeing her with new eyes. She wasn't just someone who had helped him in a moment of need. She was someone special, someone with a talent he couldn't let slip away. "Marina," he said after the investors left, "you saved my company today, and I can't let you walk away without making a proposal. I would like you to work for me, officially, as executive assistant and lead translator for the company, with a fair salary and all the growth opportunities you deserve." Marina was speechless. It was everything she had always dreamed of but never dared to hope for. "Mr. Caldwell, she began, but words failed her. Robert smiled. You don't have to answer now. Think about it. But know that you have a place here whenever you want. Marina felt tears pricking her eyes. She thought of her mother, working tirelessly for 20 years in that same building, cleaning offices to support her daughter. She thought of all the nights spent studying alone with no hope that it would lead anywhere. And now, in a single day, everything had changed. I accept, Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice firm despite the tears. I accept. And so, on that sunny day in New York, 2 lives crossed and were transformed. Robert had saved his company, but more than that, he had found something he didn't know he was looking for, someone who would show him that talent and value have nothing to do with origin or social standing. And Marina had taken the first step on a journey that would take her far beyond what she had ever imagined possible. But this was just the first page of a much more complex story, full of challenges, revelations, and transformations that neither of them could predict. Because in New York, a city of contrasts and opportunities, where skyscrapers rise beside humble communities, the most extraordinary stories always begin with an unlikely encounter and a chance to change everything. Marina's first weeks at Caldwell Tech Solutions were a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and discoveries. She arrived at the office every day at 8 in the morning, an hour before the official time, wanting to seize every minute to learn more about the corporate world that was now part of her life. Her salary was 5 times higher than anything she had imagined earning at 19, and every cent was carefully saved and shared with her mother, Helen, who still worked as a cleaner in the same building. The irony was lost on no one. During the day, Marina circulated through the corridors in her new, elegant clothes, bought with her first paycheck, attending executive meetings and translating million-dollar negotiations. At night, when the workday ended, she went down to the service floor to have coffee with her mother, before both returned home on the crowded subway that took them to Queens. Helen couldn't hide the pride she felt for her daughter, but there was also a constant worry in her tired brown eyes. She knew that world better than anyone. She had cleaned those offices for 2 decades, seen meteoric rises and devastating falls. She knew that not everyone would be happy with Marina's rapid promotion, that envy and resentment could disguise themselves as cordiality. "My daughter," she said one night while they prepared dinner in the small kitchen of their 2-bedroom apartment, "you need to be careful. That world isn't kind to people like us. They will test you. They will look for flaws. They will wait for you to fall." Marina hugged her mother, smelling the familiar scent of laundry detergent and lavender that always accompanied her. "I know, Mom, but I won't give them that satisfaction. I will work harder than anyone. I will prove I deserve to be there." And she kept her word. Marina dedicated herself intensely, arriving early, leaving late, studying the financial market, technology, and business strategies at night. Robert had quickly realized she had a brilliant mind, capable of absorbing complex information and making connections that many experienced executives couldn't. He began to include her not just in translations, but also in strategic meetings, asking for her opinion on different matters. However, not everyone in the company viewed Marina favorably. Patricia Miller, the Human Resources Director, a 40-year-old woman with platinum blonde hair and nails always impeccably painted, watched Marina with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. Patricia had built her career through years of study, 3 graduate degrees, and countless specialization courses. Seeing a girl without a formal college degree occupy a position of trust so quickly messed with her convictions about meritocracy and corporate hierarchy. "Robert," she said one day, entering his office without knocking, "we need to talk about Marina." Robert looked up from the documents he was reviewing, noting Patricia's formal tone and rigid posture. "What happened?" Patricia crossed her arms, her red suit accentuating her slender figure. "Nothing specific happened, but I need to express my concern. You gave a 19-year-old girl, without formal qualification, without corporate experience, a position of high responsibility. This is generating comments among the employees. Some feel undervalued." Robert leaned back in his chair, his face remaining neutral. "Marina saved this company, Patricia. Without her, We wouldn't have secured the investment. She has exceptional talent. Talent isn't everything, Robert, Patricia retorted, her voice gaining an edge of irritation. She has no business training, doesn't understand management, doesn't know corporate culture. And frankly, hiring the cleaner's daughter for an executive position sends a confusing message about our recruitment standards. Robert's jaw tightened. He stood up slowly, walking to the window before responding. Our recruitment standards, Patricia, should be based on competence, not surnames or diplomas. Marina has demonstrated more intelligence and dedication in 3 weeks than many executives I know demonstrate in years. And if any employee feels undervalued by that, perhaps they should question why a 19-year-old girl is working harder and better than they are. Patricia pursed her lips, clearly dissatisfied with the answer. You are making a mistake, Robert. You are mixing personal gratitude with business decisions, and that always ends badly. Robert turned to face her directly. Noted, Patricia, but the decision is mine, and Marina stays. After Patricia left, slamming the door harder than necessary, Robert sat down again, but his mind was restless. He knew Patricia was right in one aspect. The situation was delicate and could generate problems. But there was something about Marina that fascinated him, a determination, a purity of purpose that he rarely saw in the corporate world. She wasn't there for ambition or greed, but for a genuine desire to learn and grow. Marina, for her part, began to feel the waves of tension her presence caused. Some colleagues were genuinely friendly, curious about her story, and impressed by her linguistic skills. But others treated her with thinly veiled coldness, making sarcastic comments about favoritism and lack of qualification. The worst of all was Thomas Anderson, the 32-year-old sales manager, a Wharton graduate with a Harvard MBA. Thomas came from a traditional New York family and didn't hide his disdain for Marina. He viewed her rise as an affront, a breach of hierarchy that threatened the natural order of things. Interesting, he commented sarcastically during a team meeting, how someone with no academic background can occupy such a strategic position. I imagine it's a new concept of meritocracy that I'm unaware of. Marina felt the blood rush to her face, but she maintained her composure. Perhaps meritocracy should be about results, not about diplomas hanging on the wall, she replied calmly, her voice steady despite the internal nervousness. The room went silent. Some colleagues looked down, uncomfortable with the confrontation. Robert, who was present, intervened. Thomas, Marina has demonstrated exceptional results. Let's focus on work and leave personal issues aside. But the damage was done. From that day on, Thomas became a declared adversary of Marina, looking for opportunities to discredit her or create embarrassing situations. It was amidst this tense environment that Marina met Daniel Caldwell, Robert's nephew, and the company's director of innovation. Daniel was 28, with brown hair always slightly messy, expressive green eyes, and an easy smile that lit up his face. He had recently returned to New York after spending 5 years working at startups in Silicon Valley, and his approach to the corporate world was quite different from the traditional hierarchy that prevailed in the company. Daniel met Marina by chance. On a day she was on the building's rooftop terrace during lunch hour, eating a sandwich she had brought from home while studying a financial report in German. He had gone up to the terrace to make a private call and found her there, completely absorbed in reading. "You read German?" he asked, approaching with genuine curiosity. Marina looked up, meeting that green gaze that seemed to penetrate beyond surfaces. "Yes, I read and speak it, among other languages," Daniel smiled, sitting on the bench next to her without asking permission, an informality that was part of his personality. "Let me guess, you're the famous Marina, the prodigy translator who saved the company. My uncle won't stop talking about you." Marina blushed slightly. "I just did my job." Humility too. Interesting. Daniel leaned back, observing her with interest. "You know, in Silicon Valley, no one cares where you come from or what degrees you have. What matters is what you can do, how you think, how you solve problems. It's refreshing to see that mindset arriving here." Marina relaxed a little, feeling that finally there was someone who didn't judge her by her background. "And what is it like working there?" Daniel spent the next half hour telling stories about his experience in California, about startups born in garages that became billionaires, about innovation culture and breaking paradigms. Marina listened fascinated, asking intelligent questions that impressed Daniel with the depth of understanding they demonstrated. "You should go to college," he said eventually, "not because you need a degree to validate your intelligence, but because you deserve access to all the knowledge and networking that university can offer." Marina sighed. "I would like to, but I don't know if I can balance it with work. And the language course I really wanted to take is too expensive, even with my current salary. I need to help my mom, too." Daniel watched her thoughtfully. "You know the company has a scholarship program for employees, right? Any employee can apply to have courses and training paid for by the company." Marina shook her head. "No one told me about that." "Well," Daniel stood up, extending a hand to help her up. "Two, now you know. And if you need help filling out the application, you can count on me." That was the beginning of a friendship that would quickly deepen into something more. Daniel and Marina began spending more time together, him teaching her about the tech market and innovation strategies, her surprising him with cultural insights and unique perspectives that came from her life experience. They had lunch together on the terrace, exchanged messages late at night discussing ideas for the company, and gradually an emotional connection formed. Robert watched this closeness with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was happy to see his nephew, who had always been somewhat solitary and focused only on work, finally opening up to someone. On the other hand, there was a paternal concern for Marina. The corporate world was cruel to internal relationships, especially when there was a difference in hierarchical position. And if things went wrong between them, Marina could suffer professional consequences. Laura, Robert's wife, had a different view. When he shared his concerns with her, during a quiet dinner at home after the kids had gone to sleep, she gently touched his hand. "Robert, you're worrying too much. Daniel is a good man, and Marina is a smart young woman. If they like each other, who are we to interfere?" Robert took a sip of wine, his face showing the tension he felt. "It's not that simple, Laura. In the office, people are already talking about favoritism. If she starts dating my nephew, the comments will get worse. They'll say she's using relationships to climb in the company." Laura tilted her head, her blue eyes fixed on her husband. "Or maybe they genuinely connect. Maybe Marina is exactly what Daniel needs. Someone authentic who isn't impressed by surnames or bank accounts. And maybe Daniel is what Marina needs, someone who values her for who she is." Robert knew his wife was right, but the worry persisted. He had become a protective figure for Marina, seeing in her not just a talented employee, but someone who deserved every opportunity the world could offer. Meanwhile, in Queens, in a small apartment lit by a single fluorescent bulb in the kitchen, Helen talked to Marina while they prepared dinner. The mother had noticed the changes in her daughter, the different sparkle in her eyes when she mentioned Daniel, the way she smiled while checking messages on her phone. "This young man, Daniel," Helen said while chopping tomatoes for the salad, "he seems like a good person. But you need to be careful, my daughter. He comes from a very different world than ours." Marina stopped stirring the rice on the stove, looking at her mother. "I know, Mom, but he doesn't make me feel inferior because of it. He treats me as an equal." Helen smiled sadly. "Now he treats you like that. But when things get serious, when his family finds out, things might change. Rich people have different expectations, different values." "Mom," Marina turned completely, her voice loaded with determination, "I won't let my background define my future. And if Daniel really likes me, he will accept me as I am, where I come from. If not, then he's not the right person for me." Helen hugged her daughter, pride and worry mixed in her heart. "You've always been strong, my girl, stronger than me. Just promise you'll protect your heart," Marina promised. But deep down she knew it was already too late. Her heart was already involved, and with every day she spent with Daniel, she found herself falling deeper. The high situation reached a critical point on a Friday night when the company organized a happy hour to celebrate closing a big contract. The event was at a sophisticated bar in the meatpacking district with a view of the city and expensive drinks. Marina hesitated to go, feeling out of place in that environment, but Daniel insisted, promising he would stay by her side all night. The bar was crowded with executives from the company and other partner corporations. Marina wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion, and her hair was down, falling, in soft waves. She felt beautiful, but also vulnerable, conscious of the looks she received, some admiring, others critical. Daniel introduced her to several people, always with genuine pride, highlighting her intelligence and achievements. Marina conversed politely, impressing many with her ability to switch languages as needed when foreign executives approached. It was when she was alone for a moment, while Daniel went to get drinks, that Thomas approached. He was visibly intoxicated, his face red and his stance swaying. "The company Cinderella," he said sarcastically, his voice slurred, "from cleaning lady to executive in the blink of an eye. Must be magic, or maybe it's something else." Marina felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean by that?" Thomas took a step closer, his breath smelling strongly of whiskey. "Oh, come on. Everyone knows how you got this job. It wasn't through competence. It was through," he paused dramatically, "other talents." Marina felt anger rising, but before she could respond, a firm voice cut through the air. "Thomas!" Daniel had returned and was now between him and Marina, his normally friendly face now hard as stone. "You are drunk and being rude. I suggest you go home before you do something you'll regret on Monday." Thomas laughed bitterly. "Ah, of course, the prince defending the commoner. How touching. Do you think Uncle Robert will like knowing you're involved with the cleaner's daughter?" The slap came fast and hard. Marina had slapped Thomas with all the strength she could muster, the sound echoing through the bar and causing several heads to turn. Thomas stood still, in shock, his hand on his red face. "I am no commoner," Marina said, her voice low but loaded with a fierce intensity. "I work harder than you ever have. I earned my place with talent and dedication. And if you or anyone else in this company has a problem with that, the problem is yours, not mine." She turned and left the bar, tears threatening to fall, but held back by sheer willpower. Daniel followed her immediately, finding her on the sidewalk outside, arms crossed over her chest as she tried to control her breathing. "Marina," he said softly, touching her shoulder. She turned to him, and the tears finally fell. "I'm sorry. I ruined everything. I'm going to be fired now." Daniel pulled her into a hug, holding her while she cried. "You didn't ruin anything. Thomas was being an idiot. And no one is going to fire you, I guarantee it." They stood there for long minutes, New York City pulsing around them, millions of stories happening simultaneously in that gigantic metropolis. And in the middle of all that immensity, two people found each other, connected by something that transcended social classes or corporate expectations. When they finally separated, Daniel looked into Marina's eyes. "I don't care that you're the cleaner's daughter. Actually, I think it's amazing. You overcame obstacles I will never understand, achieved things most people would consider impossible. And if my family or anyone has a problem with that, they will have to deal with me." Marina smiled through her tears. "Do you really believe that?" "With every fiber of my being," he replied, and then, there on the sidewalk of a busy street in the meatpacking district, he kissed her. The kiss was sweet and intense, full of promises and possibilities, and when they separated, both knew that something fundamental had changed. They were no longer just colleagues or friends. They were something more, something that would challenge conventions and face storms. But that night, under the lights of the city that never sleeps, they chose to believe in love, in the possibility that two people from different worlds could build something beautiful together. Because in New York, where contrasts mix and boundaries dissolve, miracles happen in the most unlikely places, and love finds its way through the most solid barriers. The news of the relationship between Daniel and Marina spread through the company with the speed of a wildfire. On the Monday following the incident at the bar, the corridors of Caldwell Tech Solutions buzzed with whispers and curious glances. Some employees viewed the romance with sympathy, finding the story of the young woman who had won the heart of the Caldwell heir romantic. Others, especially those aligned with Patricia and Thomas, saw it as further proof that Marina was using her charms to climb the corporate ladder. Robert summoned both of them to a meeting in his office as soon as he arrived at work. Marina entered nervously, her hands slightly trembling, fearing she would receive a warning or even be fired. Daniel, on the contrary, entered with confidence, ready to defend his relationship if necessary. "Sit down," Robert said, his neutral tone not revealing his emotions. They sat side by side in the chairs facing the mahogany desk. Marina kept her hands clasped in her lap, while Daniel leaned back with a relaxed posture that fooled no one. The tension was visible in his rigid shoulders. Robert sighed deeply before beginning. "I heard about what happened on Friday. Thomas has already received a formal warning for inappropriate conduct and is being considered for relocation to another department. His behavior was unacceptable and will not be tolerated in this company." Marina felt a momentary relief, but she knew that wasn't all. "However," Robert continued, his voice gaining a more serious tone, "I need to talk about your relationship, not as a boss but as an uncle, and in Marina's case, as someone who genuinely cares about your well-being." Daniel leaned forward. "Uncle, before you say anything, I need to make it clear that my feelings for Marina are real. It's not something casual or irresponsible." Robert raised his hand, asking for silence. "I know, Daniel. I see how you look at her. And Marina." He turned to the young woman. "I see how you light up when you're near him. I'm not here to judge or forbid, but I need you to understand the complications this can bring." "What kind of complications?" Marina asked, her voice low. "Personal and professional," Robert replied. "Professionally, people will question every promotion, every opportunity Marina receives. They'll say it's favoritism. And personally," he paused, looking especially at Daniel, "my sister, Beatrice, Daniel's mother, will not take this news well." Daniel laughed humorlessly. "My mother never takes anything I do well. She wanted me to marry Camilla, the senator's daughter, remember? The one who only cared about parties and social status. I never wanted that." "Beatrice has expectations," Robert said, carefully. "She comes from a traditional family and has very specific views on who the Caldwells should associate with." Marina felt her stomach tighten. "She won't accept me because I'm the daughter of a cleaner." Robert didn't deny it, which in a way was worse than if he had tried to soften the truth. "Beatrice can be difficult, but Marina," he leaned over the desk, looking her directly in the eyes, "you earned your place here by merit. Don't let anyone's opinion, not even my sister's, make you doubt that." The meeting ended with an agreement. Daniel and Marina could continue their relationship, but they had to maintain absolute professionalism in the workplace. No public displays of affection, nothing that could further fuel the gossip, and both needed to be prepared to face the Caldwell family. The first confrontation with Beatrice Caldwell happened 3 weeks later, during a family dinner at the Caldwell mansion in the Hamptons. The house was imposing, a 3-story construction with perfectly manicured gardens, an Olympic-sized pool, and a garage housing cars that cost more than Marina would earn in her entire life. Daniel had insisted that Marina accompany him, arguing it was better to face the situation head-on. Marina agreed but spent days nervous, mentally rehearsing what she would say, how she would behave. Helen helped her choose a suitable dress, something elegant but not ostentatious, and spent hours giving advice on etiquette and behavior at formal dinners. When they arrived, Laura, Robert's wife, was the first to greet them at the door. She hugged Marina warmly, whispering in her ear, "Don't be intimidated. You are wonderful exactly as you are." The dining room was luxurious, with a long hardwood table, crystal chandeliers, and silver cutlery shining under the soft light. Beatrice Caldwell sat at the head of the table, a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled dark blonde hair, wearing a pearl set and a designer dress. Her face was beautiful but hard, with lines suggesting years of disapproval. Beside her was Vincent, her husband, a real estate developer with grey hair and a prominent belly denoting a life of excess, and also present was Isabella, Daniel's younger sister, a 24-year-old who had just returned from studying abroad in France, where she supposedly studied art history, but actually spent most of her time partying and traveling. "So this is Marina," Beatrice said. When Daniel made the introductions, her voice polite but cold. "My son told me about you." Marina extended her hand, which Beatrice shook briefly with the tips of her fingers, as if she had touched something unpleasant. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell. Daniel speaks of you often." "I'm sure he does," Beatrice replied, her tone impossible to decipher. The dinner began tensely. Waiters served course after course of elaborate food, each more sophisticated than the last. Marina carefully watched which cutlery to use, discreetly following the example of Laura, who sat beside her and occasionally gave her small signs of encouragement. Beatrice asked Marina several questions, all seemingly innocent but loaded with implicit judgment. "So, dear, where did you study?" "Oh, just public high school. How interesting. And your family, where are they from? Queens? How exotic. Do you plan to go to college? Maybe when you have time. How admirable." Every answer from Marina was measured and diplomatic, but she could feel the disapproval emanating from Beatrice in almost palpable waves. Daniel, beside her, was increasingly irritated, his jaw clenched. It was Isabella who eventually said out loud what everyone was thinking. "Mom," she said with poisonous sweetness, "don't you think it's amazing how Marina got such an important position in Uncle Robert's company so quickly? I mean, without college or prior experience. It's almost like a fairy tale." Marina took a deep breath, preparing to respond, but Daniel was faster. "It is amazing," he said, his voice cutting, "because Marina has a talent that 99% of people don't have. She speaks 7 languages fluently. She saved the company when no one else could. She works more hours than any executive I know, and she achieved all this without the advantage of being born into a rich family." The silence that followed was deafening. Beatrice placed her fork on the table with a dry clatter. "Daniel, dear," she said, her voice icy, "no one is questioning the girl's talents, but you need to understand that serious relationships involve more than feelings. They involve compatibility of values, of backgrounds, of life expectations." "And what exactly are you suggesting, Mother?" Daniel asked, his patience clearly exhausted. "I am suggesting that you think carefully about the future. It is one thing to admire someone. It is another thing to build a life together. You come from an established family, with responsibilities and traditions. That is important." Marina felt tears pricking her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She stood up calmly, placing her napkin beside her plate. "Excuse me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Caldwell, but I think it's best if I leave. I don't want to cause any more discomfort." Daniel stood up immediately. "I'm coming with you." "No," Marina touched his arm gently. "Stay with your family. I can get home on my own." Before Daniel could protest, Robert stood up. "I'll take Marina home. Daniel, you stay. Here. We have family matters to discuss." The car ride to Queens was silent for the first few minutes. Marina looked out the window, watching the landscape change as they moved away from the wealthy neighborhoods and approached the simpler areas of the city. The buildings got smaller, the streets narrower, the lighting scarcer. "Marina," Robert finally spoke, "I am sorry for the way my sister treated you. She was wrong." Marina discreetly wiped a tear that had escaped. "She only said what many think but don't have the courage to say." "That doesn't make it any less wrong," Robert insisted. "You know what the biggest problem with people like my sister is? They confuse privilege with merit. They were born with advantages and believe that makes them superior. But in truth, any success they achieved was built on opportunities they never had to fight for." "But she's right about one thing," Marina said, her voice loaded with sadness. "Daniel and I are from very different worlds. Maybe this can never work." Robert stopped the car in front of the humble building where Marina lived. He turned to look at her directly. "Marina, my father was a poor immigrant who arrived in America with nothing. He worked as a bricklayer for years, saved every penny, gave me the chance to study. I built my company from scratch, facing prejudice and disbelief the whole time. And you know what I learned? That the size of your heart and the strength of your determination are worth much more than any surname or bank account. But Daniel's family expects so much from him, Marina whispered. And Daniel chooses you, Robert replied simply. Doesn't that count for anything? As Marina climbed the stairs to her apartment on the 4th floor, her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Daniel. I just had the biggest fight of my life with my mother. I'm coming to your place. I need to see you. 20 minutes later, Daniel rang the doorbell. Marina opened the door and he entered, his face still red with anger. Helen, who was in the living room watching television, looked surprised at the young man in his expensive suit, standing in her modest living room. Good evening, Mrs. Sanders, Daniel said, trying to compose himself. Sorry to show up like this so late. Helen looked at her daughter, who nodded slightly, and then at Daniel. I'll make some coffee, she said, discreetly leaving for the kitchen. Daniel sat next to Marina on the worn sofa. He held her hands, interlacing his fingers with hers. I told my mother that if she can't accept you, then she will have to learn to live without me. I said you are the most extraordinary person I've ever met, and that I feel lucky you gave me a chance. And I said, if she continues to treat you badly, I'm leaving home and cutting ties. Daniel, no, Marina protested. You can't fight with your family because of me. It's not because of you, Marina, Daniel said intensely. It's for us, for the choice to live my life the way I want, with whom I want. I'm tired of letting my mother control every aspect of my life, dictate who I should date, who I should marry, what career I should follow. Marina rested her head on his shoulder, smelling the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the stress of the day. And what happens now? Now, Daniel kissed the top of her head, we continue, one day at a time, proving to everyone, especially ourselves, that love can overcome any barrier. But there were barriers they didn't know about yet, secrets that were about to come to light and would test their relationship in ways neither of them could imagine. 2 weeks later, Marina was at the office late at night, reviewing documents for an important meeting the next day. Most of the employees had already left, and the floor was silent, lit only by emergency lights and the computer monitors still on. She was so concentrated she didn't hear when someone entered the office. It was only when the person spoke that Marina jumped, in fright. You work too much, child. Marina turned quickly and saw an older woman, perhaps in her 60s, elegantly dressed in a beige suit. She had grey hair tied in an impeccable bun and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through people. Excuse me, who are you? Marina asked, slightly alarmed to find a stranger there at that hour. The woman smiled, but there was sadness in that smile. My name is Claire Mendez, and I need to speak with you about something very important. Marina frowned, confused. Do you work here? Claire shook her head. Not exactly, but I have a connection to the Caldwell family, a connection few know about. She sat in one of the chairs, indicating for Marina to do the same. With her heart beating fast, Marina sat down. What do you want to tell me? Claire took a deep breath as if preparing for something difficult. Many years ago, when Robert and Beatrice were young, there was one more brother, Anthony, the eldest. He was different from the rest of the family, more idealistic, more concerned with social justice than money. At 25, he fell in love with a woman named Helen. Marina's blood ran cold. Helen was a common name, but something in Claire's tone made her suspicious. Helen was a beautiful and intelligent woman, but she came from a humble background. She worked as a maid for the Caldwell family. Anthony's parents were furious when they discovered the relationship. They gave him an ultimatum. Either he broke up with Helen, or he would be disowned. Marina was paralyzed, barely able to breathe. Anthony chose Helen, Claire continued. They ran away together, married in secret. But the Caldwell family had a lot of power. They made their lives impossible. Anthony couldn't get a job anywhere. His bank account was frozen. Eventually, under unbearable pressure and desperate to support Helen, who was pregnant, he accepted a deal. The family would pay a generous sum and leave them alone, but Anthony would have to leave the country and never make contact again. And he accepted, Marina whispered, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together terrifyingly. He had no choice, Claire said sadly, but what the family didn't count on was that before leaving, he had left a letter, documents, proof of his marriage to Helen and of the child on the way. He left everything with someone he trusted, asking me to only reveal the truth when the time was right. Marina felt tears falling. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Claire stood up, walking to Marina and gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Because you have the right to know, Marina. Helen, the woman who raised you as a mother, isn't just a cleaner who worked for the Caldwells. She was married to Anthony Caldwell. And you, she paused significantly. You are the legitimate granddaughter of the patriarch Dominic Caldwell. You are heir to a fortune you can't even imagine. Marina's world spun. She grabbed the desk to keep from falling. No, it can't be. My mother never told me anything. She was protecting you, Claire explained. After Anthony left, Helen suffered a lot. The Caldwell family threatened her, made her life miserable. She decided to hide everything from you, raise you far from that toxicity. But now, with you working at the company, with your relationship with Daniel, she knows the truth would eventually come out. Marina was in total shock, unable to process everything she was hearing. If this was true, it meant Daniel was her cousin. It meant everything they had built was based on a lie, on incomplete information. I need to talk to my mother, Marina said, standing up abruptly. She has been waiting for this for a long time, Claire said softly. And Marina, know that Anthony never stopped loving Helen and you. He died 2 years ago in Europe, but he left everything to you both. All his inheritance, all his savings. There is a fortune waiting for you. Marina grabbed her purse with trembling hands. She needed to get out of there, needed to think, needed to understand as she ran through the empty corridors to the elevator. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger at being kept in the dark, confusion about her identity, dread about what this meant for her relationship with Daniel. When she arrived home, Helen was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea in her hands. She looked at her daughter and immediately knew the truth had been revealed. "My daughter," she began, tears already falling, "I can explain." Marina sat heavily in the chair across from her mother. "Please, Mom," she said, her voice broken. "Tell me it's not true. Tell me I'm not a Caldwell." But Helen couldn't say that because it was true, and in the next few hours, while New York slept outside, mother and daughter cried together, sharing a story of love, tragedy, and secrets that had been kept for almost 20 years. A story that would change everything. Marina didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed of her small room, staring at the cracked ceiling, while the story her mother had told echoed in her mind like a scratched record playing the same painful notes repeatedly. Anthony Caldwell, the uncle she never knew, the father who should have been present but was forced to leave. Helen, her mother, not just a cleaner, but a woman who had loved and lost, who had chosen silence to protect her daughter. And Daniel. Sweet, passionate Daniel, who made her feel the world was full of possibilities. Daniel, who she now discovered was her first cousin. When the sun rose over New York, tinting the sky orange and pink, Marina finally got up. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was a renewed determination in her posture. She needed to tell Daniel the truth, however painful it might be. He deserved to know before the whole city found out, before Claire's lawyers appeared with documents that would change the power structure of the Caldwell family. Helen was already in the kitchen, making coffee as she did every morning, but her movements were slow, loaded with sadness. When she saw Marina, she opened her arms, and mother and daughter hugged in silence, sharing a pain that words couldn't express. "You need to tell him," Helen said softly, "before someone else does." Marina nodded, wiping tears with the back of her hand. No, Mom. I'm going to call him now." The phone rang 3 times before Daniel answered, his voice sleepy but immediately concerned when he realized who was calling so early. "Marina, what happened? Is everything okay?" "No," Marina said simply. "Nothing is okay. Can you come here? I need to talk to you. It's urgent." 30 minutes later, Daniel was knocking on the door. He had dressed quickly, his hair still damp from a rushed shower, his face marked by worry. When Marina opened the door, he immediately pulled her into a hug, but she pulled away gently. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. They sat on the small living room sofa. Helen had left discreetly, giving space for the difficult conversation to come. Marina held Daniel's hands, looking at them instead of his face, trying to gather courage for the words she needed to say. "Daniel," she began, "do you know the full history of your family? All of your Uncle Robert's brothers?" Daniel frowned, confused by the question. "Well, there's Uncle Robert and my mother, Beatrice." "Why?" Marina took a deep breath. "There was a third brother, Anthony, the eldest. He died 2 years ago, in Europe." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I heard rumors about an uncle who had been disowned, but no one ever talked about him. It was almost like he didn't exist in the family history." "He existed," Marina said, her nails digging into her palms. "And he fell in love with a woman named Helen, a maid who worked for the family. Your grandparents didn't approve, forced him to choose between love and fortune. He chose love, but the pressure was so great that eventually he had to leave, leaving Helen pregnant." Daniel's face went pale as he began to connect the dots. "Marina, your mother's name is Helen." "Exactly," Marina whispered, tears falling freely now. "My mother isn't just a cleaner, Daniel. She was married to Anthony Caldwell. I am Anthony's daughter. I am Dominic Caldwell's granddaughter. And you," she swallowed hard, "you are my cousin." The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel sat completely still, his eyes wide in shock, processing information that completely rewrote his reality. When he finally spoke, his voice was just a hoarse whisper. "No, it can't be." "There are documents," Marina explained, words coming out in a torrent now that the dam had broken. "Marriage certificate, photos, letters Anthony left. A woman named Claire Mendez came to find me last night. She was Anthony's lawyer, kept all the documents for all these years. He left an inheritance for me and my mother. He never stopped loving us, but was prevented from returning by his family." Daniel stood up abruptly, walking to the small window overlooking the busy street below. His hands were in his hair, his posture demonstrating the internal turmoil he felt. "So all this," he said, his voice loaded with emotion, "our relationship, our feelings, everything was built on a lie?" "It wasn't a lie." Marina stood up too, approaching him but not touching him. "Our feelings were real, are real. But now we know the truth, and that changes everything." Daniel turned to her, and Marina saw tears in the green eyes she had learned to love. "How did your mother not tell you? How did she let this happen between us?" "She was protecting her daughter," Marina defended, her own voice breaking. "She suffered so much, Daniel. She was threatened, humiliated, forced to hide her true identity. She raised her daughter alone, working humiliating jobs, all to give me a chance at a better life. She didn't know I would end up working at the company or get involved with you." Daniel rested his forehead against hers, both crying now, sharing the pain of a love that could never be consummated the way they had imagined. "I love you, Marina," he whispered. "That doesn't change." "I love you too," she replied. "But we are family, Daniel. Cousins. We can't be together, not in that way." They stood there for long minutes, embraced in a silent farewell to a future that would never be reality. When they finally separated, both knew nothing would ever be the same. The news exploded in the Caldwell family like a nuclear bomb. Robert was the first to be officially informed by Claire Mendez, who arrived at his office the next morning with a thick folder full of legal documents. He sat in shock as she presented proof after proof of Marina's paternity, the legitimate marriage between Anthony and Helen, and the substantial inheritance Anthony had accumulated during his years abroad. Robert had fragmented memories of his older brother. Anthony had been his hero as a child, the gentle rebel who questioned their parents' rigid rules. He vaguely remembered the scandal when Anthony fell in love with a maid, the explosive fights between him and their parents, and then the heavy silence that descended on the house when Anthony left. No one spoke of him after that. It was as if he had died, and in a way he had died to the family, but not before leaving a legacy, a daughter who was now sitting on the other side of Robert's desk, her face pale but composed. "Marina," Robert said after processing all the information, "I didn't know, none of us knew you were Anthony's daughter." "I didn't know either," she replied calmly. "My mother told me everything last night, and I understand if you want me to leave the company. This complicates everything." "Leave?" Robert seemed genuinely confused. "Marina, you are part of the family. You have a right to be here, not as a favor, but as a legitimate heir." "But the relationship with Daniel," Marina began, her voice faltering. Robert sighed deeply. "Yes, that complicates things, but it doesn't change the fact that you are my niece, my brother's daughter, and you have rights that were denied for all these years." The family meeting that followed was one of the tensest in Caldwell history. Beatrice arrived furious, refusing to believe the allegations, demanding DNA tests and full investigations. Vincent remained silent, but his calculating eyes were already doing the math on how this would affect the distribution of inheritance and power. "How dare you?" Beatrice shouted at Helen, who was present at Robert's insistence. "Show up after all these years with these absurd allegations. You are an opportunist, always were. First you seduced my brother, and now you want to destroy our family." Helen, who had remained quiet during most of the meeting, finally stood up. Her posture was dignified despite her trembling hands. "I loved Anthony," she said, her voice low but firm. "I loved him more than anything in this world, and when your family separated us, when you threatened and humiliated me, I still loved him. I raised our daughter alone, working jobs you would consider degrading, all to protect her from this family's cruelty. I don't want anything from you, never did. But Marina deserves to know who she is. She deserves her inheritance, not for money, but by right." The silence that followed was profound. Even Beatrice seemed momentarily speechless before Helen's quiet dignity. It was Claire Mendez who broke the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said formally, "the documents are irrefutable, but if you wish, we can perform DNA tests to confirm paternity. However, let me be clear, Anthony's inheritance has already been legally transferred to Marina Sanders Caldwell. She is heir to a considerable fortune and is entitled to part of Dominic Caldwell's family inheritance, unless explicitly excluded in the will." Vincent finally spoke, his voice practical and cold. "How much are we talking exactly?" Claire consulted her documents. Anthony accumulated approximately $15 million during his years working abroad. Furthermore, as Dominic's legitimate son, Marina is entitled to 1/3 of the family inheritance, which would be divided equally among the 3 siblings, unless the will specifies otherwise. The numbers silenced everyone in the room. Marina was, overnight, a wealthy woman, but while everyone processed the financial implications, she could only think of Daniel, who was absent from the meeting at her insistence. She didn't want him there to witness the complete destruction of any hope they might have had. In the following days, the news spread through the company and eventually the media. Business journals published articles about the secret Caldwell heiress, about the forbidden romance between cousins who didn't know their kinship. Marina became the subject of gossip and speculation, her privacy invaded in every possible way. She stopped going to work, locking herself in the apartment with her mother while lawyers handled the legal details of her inheritance. Daniel tried to call several times, but she didn't answer. It was too painful to hear his voice, knowing the future they had dreamed of together would never be reality. It was Laura, Robert's wife, who finally managed to get her out of the apartment. She showed up one afternoon with homemade food and a gentle but firm determination. "Marina, dear," she said while tidying the kitchen and making tea, "you can't hide forever. I know you're hurting, and I know the situation is impossible. But you are strong, you always have been. Don't let this destroy you." Marina, sitting at the table with eyes red from crying, shook her head. "How do I get over this, Laura? How do I forget Daniel? How do I pretend my heart isn't broken?" Laura sat next to her, holding her hand. "You don't forget. You never forget a true love. But you learn to live with the pain, to transform it into something that strengthens you instead of destroying you, and you allow yourself to be loved in other ways, by other people." "Daniel is hurting too," Marina whispered. "He sent me messages saying he doesn't care about the kinship, that love is stronger. But how can we ignore this? How can we build a life together knowing we share blood?" "You can't," Laura admitted sadly. "Not romantically. But you can find a new form of relationship, a deep friendship, a family bond that honors the love you feel without crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed." It was wise advice, but painful to accept. Marina knew Laura was right, but acknowledging the truth didn't make the pain any less. A few weeks later, Marina finally agreed to meet Daniel. They met on the building's rooftop terrace, the same place where they had first connected, where it all began. The sun was setting over New York, painting the sky with shades of red and gold. "I missed you," Daniel said as soon as he saw her, his voice loaded with emotion. "I missed you too," Marina admitted, keeping physical distance between them, knowing if he touched her, her resolve might crumble. They talked for hours, reliving memories, crying together, laughing at inside jokes only they understood. It was both painful and cathartic, a necessary closure to a chapter that had ended abruptly. "I will always love you," Daniel said when night fell completely and the city lights began to shine like terrestrial stars. "Not as a cousin, but as the man who fell in love with you. That will never change." "And I will always love you," Marina replied, silent tears falling. "But we need to find a way to be part of each other's lives without destroying ourselves in the process." Daniel nodded, accepting what both knew to be true. "Then let us be family. Let us be the best friends we should have been from the start." "And who knows," he tried to smile through tears, "maybe one day this pain will lessen." They hugged one last time as lovers, memorizing each other's warmth, the scent, the feeling of completeness they felt together. And then they separated, silently promising to honor the love they shared by being strong enough to let it go. In the following months, Marina began to accept her new identity. She was Marina Sanders Caldwell now, heir to a fortune, member of one of New York's most influential families. But she was also the same girl who had grown up in Queens, who had learned languages in public libraries, who knew the value of hard work and humility. She used part of her inheritance to improve her mother's life, buying a comfortable apartment in a better neighborhood, ensuring Helen would never need to work again. But her mother insisted on continuing to work, no longer as a cleaner, but as coordinator of a social program Marina created to help young people from the suburbs access education. Marina also returned to work at Caldwell Tech Solutions, but now with a new title and responsibilities. She became Director of International Relations, using her linguistic talents to expand the company into global markets. And although the relationship with Daniel had changed, they maintained a deep and respectful friendship, supporting each other as each rebuilt their life. Beatrice eventually accepted Marina as part of the family, though the coldness never completely disappeared. But Marina didn't need her approval. She had learned that her value wasn't determined by others' acceptance, but by the strength of her character and the quality of her choices. And while New York continued pulsing outside, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding in its tall buildings and busy streets, Marina discovered that sometimes the greatest love stories are those that teach us to love ourselves, to honor our origins while embracing our destiny, and to find strength in the pain that breaks us but also rebuilds us. 2 years had passed since Marina discovered the truth about her origins, and the 19-year-old girl who once sang in empty hallways had transformed into a 21-year-old woman, confident and respected in the corporate world. Caldwell Tech Solutions had expanded into international markets under her leadership, opening offices in London, Shanghai, and Dubai. Marina traveled constantly, negotiating contracts in multiple languages, repeatedly proving that her talent went far beyond simply translating words. But despite all the professional success and financial stability, there was a loneliness that accompanied her. She had become close to Robert, who treated her like the niece he should have always known, and Laura was like a second mother, always present with wise advice and comforting hugs. Daniel remained part of her life, but there was a residual pain that never completely disappeared, a constant reminder of a love that had to be transformed into something different. It was a rainy Thursday when Marina met Raphael Montgomery. She was in a sophisticated cafe on Fifth Avenue, reviewing contracts for a major merger, when a tall man accidentally knocked over her briefcase while passing her table. Documents flew everywhere, and he immediately knelt to help gather them, muttering profuse apologies. "I'm sorry, I'm really sorry," he said, and when his eyes met Marina's, both paused for a moment. Raphael was 32, with black hair always a bit unruly, deep brown eyes, and a smile that completely transformed his serious face. He was a corporate lawyer, specializing in international law, and had just returned to the US after years working in London. He didn't know who Marina was, didn't recognize her surname when she introduced herself, and that ignorance of her history was refreshing. "Can I make up for my lack of coordination by buying you a coffee?" he asked with a shy smile. Marina hesitated only a second before agreeing. There was something in his sincerity in the way he looked at her, as if she were just an interesting woman and not the Caldwell heiress that attracted her. They talked for 2 hours, losing track of time as they shared stories about travel, different cultures, professional experiences. Raphael was impressed when he discovered Marina spoke 8 languages, and she was enchanted by his passion for social justice and his pro bono work helping immigrants with legal issues. When they finally said goodbye, Raphael asked for her number, and Marina gave it without the hesitation she would normally feel. There was something different about him, something that made her want to lower the defenses she had carefully built around her heart. In the following months, Raphael and Marina began seeing each other regularly. He took her to places she had never explored in New York, small hidden restaurants, art exhibitions, live music shows in discreet bars. With him, Marina wasn't the powerful executive or the Caldwell heiress. She was just Marina, a young woman rediscovering the joy of living. Raphael didn't care about her fortune. He came from a middle-class family. His father was a university professor, and his mother worked as a nurse. He had built his career through effort and determination, and saw in Marina a kindred spirit, someone who had also fought for her place in the world. Daniel watched the development of this new relationship with complex feelings. He wanted Marina to be happy, genuinely wished she would find love and joy. But seeing someone else touch her the way he once touched her, make her smile the way he once did, was painful in a way he hadn't expected. One night, during a family dinner at Robert's house, Daniel and Marina had an honest conversation in the garden, away from the others. "You seem happy," Daniel said, observing her attentively. "I'm starting to feel happy again," Marina admitted. "Raphael is a good person. He makes me feel normal, if that makes sense." Daniel smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "It makes sense, and I'm happy for you, Marina, truly. You deserve all the love and happiness in the world." "And you?" Marina asked softly. "Are you okay?" Daniel shrugged. "I'm focused on work. It's easier that way." He paused. "But if I'm being honest, I think part of me will always love you the way I loved you, even knowing it can't be." Marina touched his arm gently. "That love we felt, even if it changed form, it will always be special. No one will take that from us." It was a painful but comforting truth. They had found a way to coexist, to be family and friends, even if the ghost of an impossible romance always hovered between them. Meanwhile, at the company, new challenges arose. An aggressive competitor was trying to buy shares of Caldwell Tech Solutions, offering exorbitant amounts to minority shareholders. Thomas Anderson, who had been relocated to the Boston branch after the incident with Marina, had left the company and was now working for this competitor, feeding them inside information and strategies to destabilize the Caldwells. Robert was visibly stressed, deep circles under his eyes and grayer hair, evidencing the pressure he felt. One night, he summoned Marina, Daniel, and a few other trusted executives for an emergency meeting. "We are being systematically attacked," Robert explained, showing charts and reports. "Someone is leaking confidential information. Our clients are being approached with better offers. Our projects are being sabotaged. If we don't stop this soon, we could lose control of the company." Marina analyzed the documents carefully, her mind working quickly to identify patterns. She noticed something the others had missed: small inconsistencies in reports, file accesses at strange times, suspicious communications. "There is someone still inside the company," she said finally. "Someone is working with Thomas, passing updated information." Robert frowned. "Who?" Marina pointed to specific details in the reports. "By the access patterns and the type of information leaked, it has to be someone high level. Someone with access to executive meetings and confidential documents." The investigation that followed was intense. Marina worked with the information security team, cross-referencing data, analyzing access logs, investigating communications. And what she discovered was shocking. Patricia Miller, the human resources director who had never hidden her disdain for Marina, was secretly working with Thomas. Her motivation was a mixture of greed — she had been promised an executive position at the competing company — and personal resentment. She had never gotten over the fact that Marina, without formal qualifications, had achieved more success than she had with all her graduate degrees. When Robert confronted Patricia with the evidence, she initially denied it, but eventually confessed, her mask of professionalism falling to reveal years of accumulated bitterness. "You represent everything wrong with the corporate world," she spat at Marina during the final meeting before being fired. "You rose by luck, by being who you are, not by real merit." Marina, who years ago would have been hurt by those words, now just looked at her with pity. "Patricia, I earned my place here. I worked more hours than anyone, proved my worth repeatedly. The problem isn't with me. The problem is that you are so consumed by your own insecurity that you can't recognize others' merit when it comes from a place you consider inferior." Patricia was fired immediately, and legal proceedings were initiated against both her and the competing company. The sabotage attempt was thwarted, but the incident left scars. Robert realized he needed to restructure the company's management, bring in new trusted people, strengthen the organizational culture. It was Raphael who suggested something that would change the company's direction. During a dinner with Marina, he casually mentioned his work helping immigrants and refugees with legal issues. "You know," he said, "there is so much talent being wasted because people don't have opportunities. Immigrants with incredible qualifications, working basic jobs because their credentials aren't recognized here. Brilliant young people from underprivileged communities without access to proper education." Marina fell, silent, an idea forming in her mind. "What if we created a program," she said slowly, "something that identifies and develops unconventional talent, people who, like me, have extraordinary skills but don't come from traditional places?" Raphael smiled. "That would be amazing. You could change lives." The following week, Marina presented the proposal to Robert and the board. The Anthony Caldwell program, named in honor of her father, would identify talented youth from underprivileged communities and qualified immigrants, offering them training, education, and job opportunities within the company. It would be a way to honor the memory of Anthony, who had fallen in love with someone beyond social barriers, and also to give back the opportunities Marina had received. The program was approved with enthusiasm. Robert saw it as a way to renew the company, bring in fresh perspectives and diverse talents. Daniel was named co-director of the program alongside Marina, giving them an opportunity to work together on something meaningful, channeling any remaining tension into a greater purpose. But not everyone in the Caldwell family was happy with the direction things were taking. Beatrice, still resistant to fully accepting Marina, saw the program as another way for her niece to gain power and influence in the family. During a tense family meeting, she finally expressed her accumulated frustrations. "This is going too far," she said, her voice loud and irritated. "First, Marina shows up out of nowhere claiming to be Anthony's daughter. Then she assumes positions of power in the company. Now she wants to change the entire corporate culture, bring more people like her inside. Where will this end?" Marina, who had remained calm during Beatrice's entire speech, finally spoke, her voice firm but not aggressive. "Beatrice, I understand that my presence here upsets you. I remind you of a brother you lost, of choices your family made that resulted in tragedy. But I am not here to take anything from you. I am here because this is my legacy too. My father was excluded from this family for falling in love with the wrong person. He died far from his homeland, prevented from seeing his daughter grow up. The least I can do is honor his memory by trying to ensure no one else is excluded for not fitting arbitrary standards of acceptability." The silence that followed was profound. Even Beatrice seemed momentarily speechless. It was Robert, who finally spoke. "Marina is right. We failed Anthony. Our family forced him to choose between love and loyalty, and he chose love. That made him the bravest of us all, not the weakest. And now we have the chance to correct that mistake, to build something better." Beatrice said nothing more, but in the following days something changed. She began attending the program meetings, initially with skepticism, but gradually with genuine interest. She saw brilliant young people, full of potential, people who just needed an opportunity. And perhaps, somewhere deep down, she began to question the prejudices she had held all her life. Meanwhile, the relationship between Marina and Raphael deepened. He officially asked her to be his girlfriend 6 months after they met, on a starry night on her apartment terrace. Marina accepted, but was honest with him about her history with Daniel, about the complexity of her past. Raphael listened patiently and then hugged her. "Marina, we all have stories. We all carry scars. What matters is what we do with those experiences, how we allow ourselves to grow from them. I'm not competing with Daniel or your past. I am here in the present, choosing to build a future with you." It was exactly what Marina needed to hear. With Raphael, she didn't feel she needed to be perfect or hide parts of herself. He accepted her completely, with all her complexities and contradictions. Daniel, for his part, was learning to accept his own journey. He began dating Julia, an architect he had met through the Anthony Caldwell program. She was a Venezuelan immigrant, talented and determined, who had left her country due to political instability. There was a depth in her that Daniel recognized, an understanding of loss and rebuilding that resonated with his own experiences. One night, during a party celebrating the program's first anniversary, Marina and Daniel found themselves alone for a moment on the balcony. They watched together as their respective partners chatted animatedly with other guests inside. "We're going to be okay," Daniel said softly. Marina nodded, a solitary tear rolling down her cheek. "Yes, we are. Different from what we imagined, but okay." They hugged, a hug of family, of friends, of two people who had loved deeply and learned to transform that love into something sustainable and healthy. It wasn't the ending they had dreamed of, but it was an ending that respected who they were and what they had shared. New York continued pulsing outside, indifferent to the small victories and defeats happening on a lit terrace. But for Marina and Daniel, that moment represented something important. It represented the ability to survive pain, to find new paths when old ones close, to honor the past while building the future. And as the city lights shone like promises of infinite possibilities, both knew they were finally ready to write new chapters in their lives. Chapters where the love they shared would continue to exist, but transformed into something that strengthened them instead of destroying them. 3 years had passed since that rainy night when Marina discovered the truth about her origins, and the 19-year-old girl who sang in empty hallways had transformed into a 24-year-old woman, respected not just in New York but internationally. Caldwell Tech Solutions had become a benchmark for diversity and innovation, and the Anthony Caldwell program had already benefited over 200 young people, transforming lives and proving that talent knows no social boundaries. Marina was in her office on a Friday afternoon, reviewing proposals for the company's expansion into Latin America, when her secretary announced an unexpected visit. Beatrice Caldwell was there, asking to speak with her in private. Marina felt her stomach tighten. Despite years of coexistence and a relationship that had gradually improved, Beatrice had never been warm with her. There was professional respect, a cold politeness, but never genuine affection. "Send her in," Marina said, gesturing for the secretary to allow Beatrice entry. Beatrice entered with her usual impeccable posture, wearing a beige suit and carrying a designer bag. But there was something different about her, a softness Marina had never seen before. She sat in the chair across from Marina's desk without being invited. behavior that would normally be considered rude, but somehow seemed appropriate in that moment. "Marina," Beatrice began, her voice lacking its customary hardness, "I need to speak with you about something I should have said a long time ago." Marina leaned forward, intrigued. "What is it?" Beatrice took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I visited Anthony's grave. In Europe. I went last week." Marina was surprised. She herself had visited her father's grave 2 years ago, a deeply emotional moment where she had cried for the loss of a man she never knew, but whose blood ran in her veins. "He is buried in a small cemetery in Italy," Beatrice continued, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "A simple, quiet place. I stayed there for hours, talking to him as if he could hear me, asking for forgiveness for the things I didn't say when he was alive, for the times I stood by our parents when they forced him to choose." Marina remained silent, allowing Beatrice to continue. "Anthony was my older brother. He protected me when we were children, defended me from bullies at school, taught me to be brave, and when he fell in love with Helen, I saw happiness in his eyes, something I had never seen before. But I didn't defend him. I stood by our parents because it was easier, because I was afraid of losing my own position in the family." A tear finally escaped, rolling down Beatrice's perfectly made-up cheek. "I carried that guilt all these years, and when you appeared, so like him, so brilliant and determined as he was, it was as if he had returned to haunt me. I rejected you because you reminded me of all my failures, of all the times I chose safety over courage." Marina felt tears burning in her own eyes. "Beatrice," she said softly, "you can't carry that guilt forever. My father made his choices, and from what my mother told me, he never regretted them. He loved, lived, was happy, even far from the family. Maybe it was hard, but he chose love, and that meant something." Beatrice wiped her tears with a delicate handkerchief. "I know. And seeing you, seeing the program you created in his honor, seeing how you transform lives, I realize he won in the end. His legacy isn't money or power. It's you. It's the kindness you spread, the opportunities you create, the way you break barriers that should have been torn down a long time ago." She stood up, walking to the window overlooking the city. "I want to apologize, Marina, for all the times I treated you poorly, questioned your worth, made you feel like you didn't belong to this family. You don't just belong. You are perhaps the best of us all." Marina stood up too, approaching Beatrice. Her aunt turned, and for the first time since they met, Marina saw real vulnerability in her eyes. "Can we start over?" Marina asked, extending her hand. "As real family." Beatrice ignored the extended hand and, to Marina's surprise, pulled her into a hug. It was a tight hug, full of years of regret and hope for reconciliation. When they separated, both were crying, but they were tears of liberation, of old wounds beginning to heal. In the following weeks, something fundamentally changed in the family dynamic. Beatrice began actively participating in program meetings, contributing her connections and experience. She organized family dinners where Marina and Helen were treated with the respect and affection they always deserved. Isabella, who had followed her mother's example in treating Marina coldly, also began to change, getting closer to her cousin and discovering a genuine friend in her. It was during one of these family dinners that Raphael, who was already considered part of the family, made an announcement that silenced everyone. "I wanted to ask for your permission," he said, looking especially at Robert and Helen, "to ask Marina to marry me." The silence that followed was full of emotion. Helen began to cry silently, tears of joy rolling down her face. Robert stood up and hugged Raphael, giving his blessing. And Marina, who had no idea this moment was coming, looked at the man who had entered her life by accident and become her anchor, her partner, her future. Raphael knelt before her, taking a velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple but beautiful ring, with a diamond that shone under the soft light of the chandelier. "Marina Sanders Caldwell," he said, his voice loaded with emotion, "you are the most extraordinary person I have ever met. You taught me about courage, about overcoming adversity, about transforming pain into strength. I want to spend the rest of my life by your side supporting your dreams, celebrating your victories, comforting your pains. Will you marry me?" Marina couldn't speak immediately, tears preventing the words from coming out. She just nodded vigorously, extending a trembling hand for Raphael to place the ring. When he slid the ring onto her finger, the whole room exploded in applause and tears of joy. Daniel, who was present with Julia, was one of the first to hug Marina. "I am so happy for you," he whispered in her ear, and she knew he was sincere. The love they had shared had transformed into something different, but equally valuable. It was familial love, mutual respect, and the genuine joy of seeing the other prosper. Wedding preparations began immediately. Marina insisted she wanted something meaningful, not ostentatious. She wanted to celebrate not just her love for Raphael, but also the journey that had brought her to that moment. The ceremony would be at the headquarters of the Anthony Caldwell program, a building that had been renovated specifically to house young people in training and classrooms for vocational courses. The chosen date was significant. March 25th, Anthony Caldwell's birthday. It was a way to honor the father she never knew, to symbolically bring him to the most important moment of her life. In the months leading up to the wedding, Marina and Raphael worked on something special. They created a foundation bearing the names of their parents, Helen and Anthony, dedicated to helping low-income families access quality education. Part of Caldwell Tech Solutions' profits would be directed to this foundation, ensuring long-term sustainability. News of the foundation spread quickly, and Marina received hundreds of messages of support and gratitude. Young people who had benefited from the Anthony Caldwell program wrote emotional letters, sharing how their lives had changed. Fathers and mothers thanked them for giving hope to their children, and Marina realized her legacy would be much greater than money or social position. It would be measured in lives transformed, in opportunities created, in barriers torn down. The wedding day dawned sunny and beautiful. New York was having one of its rare days of clear blue sky, as if the city itself were celebrating. The foundation building was decorated with simple but elegant flowers, and chairs had been arranged in the garden Marina had insisted on creating, a green oasis in the middle of the concrete metropolis. The guests were an eclectic mix. Executives in expensive suits sat alongside young people from Queens in their best clothes. International investors chatted with immigrants who had been helped by the program. It was a true celebration of diversity, of unity, of possibilities. Marina wore a simple but stunning white dress, chosen by her and Helen together. Her hair was down in soft waves, and she wore the pearl necklace that had belonged to the grandmother she never knew, a gift from Beatrice symbolizing final acceptance and belonging. When it was time to walk down the aisle, Marina looked at who would accompany her. Robert was there, ready to exercise the role of father figure he had assumed in recent years, but Marina had another idea. She extended her hand to Helen. "Mom," she said, her voice emotional, "you brought me here, in every sense. You raised me, loved me, protected me. You deserve to walk me to him." Helen began to cry, but they were tears of pure joy. Side by side, mother and daughter walked down the improvised aisle in the garden, each step representing a journey of resilience, of love that conquered all adversities. Raphael waited at the altar, his face radiant with happiness. When Marina arrived at his side, he took her hands, and both turned to the officiant. The ceremony was beautiful and emotional. When it was time for the vows, Marina surprised everyone. She had written her vows in 8 different languages, representing her journey and all the cultures she had learned to love. She recited promises in English, Portuguese, French, Spanish, German, Italian, Mandarin and Arabic, and Raphael, who had learned a few phrases in each language specifically for this moment, responded in each of them. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. It was more than a wedding. It was a celebration of love that transcended barriers, of recognized talents, of second chances and new beginnings. When they were finally declared husband and wife, Raphael kissed Marina tenderly, and the crowd exploded in applause. But the most emotional moment was still to come. During the reception, Marina asked for attention. She stood in the center of the garden, surrounded by all the people she loved, by everyone who had been part of her extraordinary journey. "I want to thank all of you. she began, her voice clear despite the emotion, "for being here today, for being part of this celebration. But I also want to talk about journeys, about transformations, about the power of believing in oneself and in others." She looked at Helen. "My mother taught me that dignity doesn't come from how much money you have or what surname you carry. It comes from how you treat others, how you face adversity, how you love unconditionally." Then she looked at Robert. "My uncle taught me that true leadership is about creating opportunities for others, about recognizing talent wherever it exists, about having the courage to challenge conventions." Her gaze moved to Daniel. "My cousin taught me that love can take many forms, that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, and that family is about supporting each other through all storms." She looked at Beatrice. "My aunt taught me that it is never too late to change, to ask for forgiveness, to rebuild bridges that seemed permanently burned." And finally, she looked at Raphael. "And my husband," she smiled through tears, "taught me that it is possible to love again, that the past does not define the future, and that life's greatest encounters happen when we least expect them." Marina paused, looking at all the faces around her. "But the most important lesson I learned came from someone I never met. My father, Anthony Caldwell, chose love over comfort, principles over privilege, authenticity over acceptance. He lost a lot, but he gained more. He gained a life lived with truth, a genuine love, and left a legacy that isn't measured in money, but in lives touched." She raised her glass. "So, I propose a toast. To everyone who has the courage to choose the harder path when it is the right one. To everyone who sees potential where others see only origin. To everyone who believes the world can be better, fairer, more loving. And especially," she looked at the sky, "to the man I never met but who shaped my life in ways he could never imagine. Dad, wherever you are, I hope you are proud." There was no sound other than emotional sobs and handkerchiefs being used to wipe tears. Then, slowly, everyone stood up, raising their glasses in a collective toast. To Anthony, to Helen, to love, to second chances, to infinite possibilities. As the party continued, Marina and Raphael escaped for a few moments to the building's terrace. From there they could see New York stretching as far as the eye could see, millions of lights starting to twinkle as night fell. "It's amazing," Raphael said, hugging her from behind, "to think about how many stories are happening down there right this moment. How many people are fighting, loving, losing, winning." Marina leaned back against him, feeling completely at peace for the first time in a long time. "And our story," she said softly, "is just one among millions, but it's ours, and it's beautiful and it's real." They stood there for long, minutes observing the city that had shaped them, that had witnessed their struggles and triumphs. New York, with all its complexity and contradictions, with its brutal contrasts and infinite possibilities, was more than just a backdrop for their lives. It was part of who they were. Years later, when Marina would look back on that day, she would realize it wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of a journey that began with a young girl singing alone in an empty hallway, that went through painful discoveries and impossible loves, that involved unlikely reconciliations and profound transformations, and that eventually led to a place of true belonging. The cleaner's daughter had become a respected leader, yes, but more importantly, she had become a bridge between worlds, a voice for those who weren't heard, living proof that talent knows no social boundaries, and that love in all its forms is the most powerful force in the universe. And while New York continued pulsing down below, indifferent and eternal, Marina Sanders Caldwell, formerly just Marina Sanders, before that just the cleaner's daughter, now wife, leader, transformer of lives, looked to the future with hope and gratitude, because she had learned the most important lesson of all, that it doesn't matter where you come from, it matters where you are going and who you become along the way. And that lesson, that fundamental truth, was the greatest legacy she could pass on to the young people in the program, to future generations, to anyone who ever felt too small, too poor, too inadequate to dream big, because Marina had proved that no one is too small to change the world. You just need courage to start, determination to continue, and enough love in your heart to remember why you started. And with that certainty, as Raphael spun her around to kiss her under the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, Marina knew her story wasn't about endings. It was about beginnings, about possibilities, about hope. And in a city like New York, where millions of stories intertwine every day, where dreams are born and die and are reborn again, where the impossible happens on the most unlikely corners, the story of Marina Sanders Caldwell was a reminder that miracles happen. Not in the dramatic and instant way we imagine, but gradually, through courageous choices, hard work, and the absolute refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the true magic of life. Not in instant transformations, but in the human capacity to grow, change, overcome. One word at a time, one day at a time, one dream at a time. Until one day you look back and realize the person you were no longer exists. You have transformed into something bigger, stronger, more complete. And the journey, with all its pains and joys, was worth every step. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Marina's story and her extraordinary journey have deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by the trajectory of this young woman who overcame all barriers, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it the discovery of Marina's origins? The impossible love with Daniel? The reconciliation with Beatrice? Or the happy ending alongside Raphael? Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, speaking about resilience, love, family, and the ability to transform pain into strength. Don't miss our next episode, where a new emotional story awaits you. Until then, remember, it doesn't matter where you come from, but who you choose to become. We'll see you in the next episode.